Welcome to the MEND, a podcast to learn about services and support for victims and survivors of crime, sponsored through the Center for Crime Victim Services here in Vermont. I am Anna Nassett, and I am host of this bi-monthly podcast and show, and I am delighted and giddy to return for Season 3 of the MEND. We took almost a year hiatus and are back better than ever with an exciting new season of the show's voices and services. And I'm so excited to be back in the studio for the first time in 2 years. So it's just really exciting to be back here at MRV TV, here with the CCVS, and launching a new season of the MEND. And to launch our new season, I thought it'd be great to have the new executive director of the Center for Crime Victim Services here with us, Jennifer Poehlmann. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure to be here, and so I'm happy that we can be a part of providing your voice and the work that you do to the state of Vermont and to states throughout the country. So it's an honor to be a part of your work. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's been great to hear over the last year as people have been missing the show from all over the country. People were tuning in, so it's great to bring this back. So just a reminder to our listeners and new listeners of the show was created to take a deeper look at services, organizations, and concepts for victims and survivors of crimes. We want to acknowledge the healing process and provide resources not only in our state, but throughout the country that could benefit victims of crime as they begin to mend. And today we're going to be looking at community response. This is a show where we can learn, myself included, and we invite everyone to learn from this. I also always want to offer a trigger warning. Our goal is to create a safe place to discuss topics of healing, but within that we may occasionally hear a story related to crime, discuss our mental health, or have sensitive subject matter. We urge you to care for yourself as you're listening. So today's episode, as I said, I wanted to start at the beginning and have Jennifer on to talk about the Center for Crime Victim Services and what projects and initiatives they've been working on for the last year. So to start, I'd love to share a little bit more about Jennifer and the prolific set of skills she brings to her role as the executive director. Jennifer is a graduate of Brown University and Cornell Law School. Prior to joining the CCVS, she has worked for the Office of the Attorney General in Rhode Island under their juvenile unit, Law Guardian's Office in Ithaca, New York, National Center for Prosecution of Child Abuse, National Committee to Prevent Child Abuse, Children's Legal Service in Boston, and Prevent Child Abuse in Vermont. From there, she would join CCVS for several years as the Director of Public Policy and Victims Assistance Coordinator. She would work with the Vermont Children's Alliance as their Director of Public Policy and Executive Director, and is contracted for a grant with the Vermont State Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. And now we are honored to have her here at the helm of the CCVS. So Jennifer, thank you so much for being here today. I'm looking forward to getting to know you better and about your work and about your passion.
Thank you.
Yes. So first off, I'm always interested to hear from guests how they were called to this work. If you're comfortable sharing that with the listeners, it's always nice to hear a little bit about your journey and how you came to this role.
Sure. And I absolutely do have one of those stories that is the call to moment. It happened for me when I was actually 13. I was in high school and was taking a class called The Law and You. And throughout that class, it occurred to me, I was like, wow, what amazing things a lawyer could do on behalf of people that need that kind of support. And literally, I can remember where I was in my hallway in high school when I said, I know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to become a lawyer, and I am going to achieve justice for women who experience sexual violence and for children who've been abused. And my concept of justice as a 13-year-old was I was going to make sure that the people who committed those acts were going to go to jail. And so that was my concept of justice as a 13-year-old. But I did know in that moment that that's exactly what I wanted to do. And throughout my entire, since I was 13, I've never strayed from that. And all of my volunteer experiences, all of my educational experiences, all of my professional experiences have been about attaining that goal. Throughout that process and throughout my own growth, the notion of justice has changed. but it was a recognition that, and anybody that knows me, my family, even from the time that I was 5, always calls me the champion of the underdog. And for some reason, when I was 13, I already knew that children and women who experience violence of this nature needed a voice. And I felt that by becoming an attorney, I could provide that. But again, through my journey, learning that justice is not quite as simple as identifying who caused the harm and then removing them from society. And so I have evolved quite a bit, and it's just learning all the different ways that I can support victims of all crimes in obtaining justice for themselves and helping them to realize, their own definitions of justice and what that means. So it's been a linear path, but it's been a path that has expanded and grown as I've developed and learned more.
Amazing. I don't think there are many 13-year-olds that are called to be lawyers. So what a purpose-driven life you've led. And I really love how you view justice has changed over the years, because I think that's so important, that it's not simply removing that person and incarcerating them. Justice looks different for every single individual. Yeah.
It would be so much easier if my 13-year-old vision of justice was the way it was, because the answer would be black and white. But as we know that do the work, the shades of gray are so significant and so individual.
Absolutely. Well put. And I'm so excited, like, especially with your purpose-driven life. So great to have you in this place of leadership for our state with the center. I think it's really exciting to see what you're going to do. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So just to refresh our listeners, who may be new listeners, could you tell us what the Center for Crime Victim Services, and if there is a counterpart in each state, along with kind of just what the Center for Crime Victim Services does?
Sure. The Center for Crime Victim Services was created here in Vermont in 1991 with the intentional purpose in terms of providing an agency that would serve to both be the pass-through for federal funding that supports victims of crime, whether it be VOCA dollars, VAWA dollars, other dollars. So each state has to have a pass-through entity for those dollars. And also we're created as the pass-through for state funding as well, most of which comes from fees and fines on traffic tickets and criminal convictions. There is a version of us in every state, but it looks quite different because, again, each state has to have a designated entity for those federal funds to come in, but not everybody has an agency that looks exactly like ours. So it is different, but there is some touch point for victim services, especially the funding point in every state. With respect to what the center does, we have our mission basically, and our vision is to provide this network of support for victims and survivors of crime, to be able to collaborate, to pull together again that network, and to facilitate support and conversations around that. We directly do administer both the Victims Compensation Program and the Restitution Program. The Victims Compensation Program allows us to, I'll be brief, but allows us to provide compensation for certain crime-related expenses for victims who have reported to the police. There doesn't have to be a conviction, but there does have to be a report to the police. But we're able to provide support upfront in those cases. With respect to restitution, that is once there's been a criminal conviction, the court has ordered a certain amount of money is owed to the victim due to crime-related losses. And in certain cases, we're actually able to provide some upfront reimbursement for the victim that has nothing to do with what we've been able to collect from the offender. So those are two, in a nutshell, of our direct service programs that we administer. But we also do support over 67 sub-grantees throughout the state that are provide a variety of different services for victims. It could be legal services, the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence programs, the Victim Assistance Program, which consists of the 27 state's attorneys in throughout Vermont, state's attorneys, victim advocates. We do supervised visitation programs, child advocacy centers. So we really have this embedded network of support that we provide. We provide training throughout the state, grant administration, and we also do policy work on behalf of victims and survivors of crime, and also our providers. So we're constantly in conversation, and during the session, constantly engaging in policy discussions and monitoring bills and policies that that impact victims and survivors and providers. So those are some of the basic things that we do.
Just very basic, just a couple things. No, you all are amazing. Just, I mean, really such a model for what other states can be looking at as well. And I know have been a model in the past. And so it's just great to, I don't know, be part of the work that you're doing. And just, I've been able to attend trainings and different things over the years, and then doing this show. It's just such an honor to really be able to continue to work with you all and share the incredible services you offer. We've had episodes in the past for listeners about restitution and other folks from the Center for Crime Victim Services on that you can learn more about what they do. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I've noticed that your background and passion is for the safety of children. Can you tell me what is currently being worked on in the state of Vermont to ensure the safety and rights for children, and how you are involved? Like, please expand, you know, just kind of the incredible background that you've had and what you see happening now.
Sure. As well, I can certainly speak very closely to the concept of child advocacy centers in our state, having been the former director of the Vermont Children's Alliance, which is the umbrella organization for the child advocacy centers in our state. A child advocacy center is essentially it's a child-friendly space which serves basically as the clearinghouse and the fulcrum, essentially, that pulls together all the partners in an investigation. So before child advocacy centers, what would happen when an abuse allegation would come in is you would have the child being bounced from person to person, telling their story, being asked to tell their story over and over again to individuals who may or may not even be trained in working with children. Children were brought to police stations, let's say, to give their statements, were interviewed in cubicles. And the Child Advocacy Center model really changes that piece, and really creates this multidisciplinary team that includes prosecutors, advocates, mental health professionals, school personnel, law enforcement, DCF, and really creates this group that is working and communicating together constantly in following that case. And I'm very proud to say that Vermont's the only state in the country that provides access in every single county to children and their non-offending caregivers in terms of responding to abuse allegations. And all of our child advocacy centers are recognized by the National Children's Alliance, which is their parent organization. So Vermont is really cutting edge in terms of being able to provide that level of access and support for children. Each year, they're averaging about 1,400 cases that they're responding to and providing support for. So that's a piece that I was intimately involved with, and that the center provides ongoing support in terms of funding to keep those programs' doors open. So I think that's a really important piece. Another piece that we do is we partner with other entities that are looking outside the criminal justice system, such as Voices for Vermont's Kids, which is looking at the other pieces of a child's life and well-being. And we partner with them on a number of different initiatives. We serve on the advisory board for DCF. And then more specifically, some of the pieces that we've been following or involved with, I think that your audience is well aware of the St. Joseph's orphanage issue that was before the legislature a couple of years ago, that eliminated the statute of limitations for a person to be able to pursue remedies when they've been physically abused. And something that is near and dear to me is there currently is a hearsay exception for children who have been sexually abused. By hearsay, that means that if there is a court proceeding, somebody who the child is close to, let's say a teacher or another individual, perhaps a caregiver, who they disclosed an incident of sexual abuse to, can actually come in and speak to that in a court proceeding. Unfortunately, that has not been extended to children who've been physically abused. And I have been in different roles trying to push that issue for the past, I would literally say, a dozen plus years to try and create that expansion. So that is something that there is a bill, and each year there's a bill. So next year I intend to make that a priority. That's really important to me, that children who've been physically abused obtain the same protections that a child who's been sexually abused.
Absolutely. Amazing work that you're doing. Really, I just learned a lot. And, once again, Vermont leads the way of being a brave little state and really just, looking of how we can serve every single community member and serve them in a way that actually treats them not just as a victim, but as a person. And so I can just really see the leadership you've had with that. And I'm really excited to continue to work with that. For new listeners, we've also done a podcast on the St. Joseph's Orphanage Restorative Justice Inquiry. If you would like to learn more about that, please do check that out, because I think it's a really important podcast to listen to. So along with additionally, what work is being done for underserved victims? We just talked a little bit about that, but how do we support victims who do not feel safe reporting? How do we change that narrative, and what work are you all doing around that?
Those are really significant conversations that we are having pretty much on a daily basis, and we are engaging with partners around that discussion as well. I think in order to figure out how we change the narrative, one of the most important pieces that we're trying to do is to figure out why they're not reporting, because before we can figure out how to engage individuals, it's important to understand the whys, and it's not as simple as one different piece. And so we're working with partners and working with Crime Research Group to try and uncover what some of those issues are. Certainly, we know that for many people, it might be a cultural issue. For other people, it might just be simply distrust of law enforcement, distrust of the criminal justice system. And other people, it might just be knowledge, lack of understanding what their options might be. And others, it might be, this is not certainly not a new thing either, that is fear of not being believed. And so there are a variety of issues. So for us to try and figure out how we answer that and change that narrative, we're trying to dig down and figure out for different individuals or different, let's say, populations of victims, it might look differently. So again, we are working with our partners to gather some of that anecdotal information, outright. We've been speaking with like the Pride Center, for example, and talking about some of their populations and their victims and survivors and what those barriers are. And again, we are working with Crime Research Group to start to look at this issue. And there's been a lot of discussion about the disparate impact on defendants in terms of exploring racial and systemic bias, but we're also interested in finding out where there's racial and systemic bias that plays out in terms of how victims are responded to and how victims are treated. And that's another piece that Crime Research Group is going to look at for us, because again, there's been a focus on defendants, which is very appropriate and extremely helpful, but we're also interested in the flip side of that coin and victim impact. And we are working with the Racial Disparities Advisory Council, getting information from them. So those are some pieces, again, that we're trying to work with the people that have the boots on the ground to get more of that information, and then working also in terms of trying to get some data points as well.
Amazing. That's really, really important work, and it's just going to continue to provide safety for all Vermonters. And I think it's so important to look at those things with victims as well. Every time I speak or share my story, I always say, like, if any factor was different, if I wasn't in a place of privilege, if I wasn't white, if I wasn't female, would I be sitting here today? I don't know. I'd like to think I would be, but I think it's really important that we look at those things for victims and how they're being met. How do you want to start to see that flow and be implemented into the mission, or continue to grow that mission for the Center for Crime Victim Services? It's kind of a tag on to what we just talked about, but just kind of what would you like to see happen?
Well, I think one concrete idea that we're working on is supporting the bias incident response system that has been developed down in Windham County. They are looking to receive funding, federal funding, for a bias incidents advocate who would be working with victims of bias and trying to connect them with resources and that would be appropriate and supportive from their perspective, and trying to connect them with the community. So this would be a 3-year position and hopefully would grow. But those are some of the more grassroots pieces that we're trying to respond to and support, trying to meet communities where they're at, because they know best what would be helpful to victims and survivors that they're working with. And so to sponsor and support any of those initiatives that they're growing that, again, reflect the needs of their communities, the people that they're working with, versus the state coming in and saying, well, we think that this will be the way to go. So those are the kinds of places where we're looking to get direction in terms of how we can support those. So that's something that we're really crossing our fingers on, and we would love to see that become a pilot for other communities that are working with individuals who are experiencing incidents of bias. Another piece that we really want to see implemented or changed, if we are ever going to change this narrative, is if we are going to give victims rights, it's to give them meaning. We have a lot of nice victims' rights on the books, but those are rights without recourse currently. And we are very excited about the legal partnership that we provide that supports victims outside of the criminal justice system to meet their needs, whether it be housing, whether it be something in civil court versus relative to even a divorce or custody. So other pieces that are part of a victim's supporting a victim that are not just criminal justice system related. And also with respect to legal rights, we are bringing in Meg Garvin, who is an amazing person who's been just this leader, this beacon in terms of victims' rights. She is with the National Crime Victim Law Institute, and she's been just this inspiration for decades, I feel like, in terms of really speaking to advancing victims' rights in a meaningful way.
She's incredible.
Yeah.
She's amazing.
She's coming in May.
Okay.
In May to speak to our state. So we're really trying to shift the framework in terms of how we think about victims' rights. And are they just on paper? And if so, how do we then expect victims to really engage when there's really nothing that can be done if those rights are not honored? And then finally, we used to have a victim survivor crime council here at the center, and that is no longer, but we are looking to bring that back, because we really want to empower victims to be able to lend their voice to initiatives, to the center's own internal policies, but also other policies around the state, to give feedback. And so we're starting the process of rebuilding that. So we're really excited about that.
Amazing. It sounds like there's just so many good things happening. One of the things I love about the CCVS and about the state of Vermont is you really listen to individual communities and aren't just saying like, okay, this is what you have to do. Like really, like by bringing in those bias advocates and things like that, like it just really speaks volumes to the CCVS as well as to our state, and that, we don't want our victims' rights just to be this statement we make. We want them to actually be upheld. Mm-hmm. And that's so important, that you don't feel like it's performative. You feel like it's something that actually is meaningful and resonates with you.
Yes, exactly. There's nothing, I think, more frustrating for the victims and survivors we work with than for them to say, well, I have this right, and we'll go and try and pursue that, or advocate will, or their attorney will, and basically to get the door shut in their face.
Yeah.
It's very discouraging, and those stories are shared back in communities. And when nothing can be done, those stories again are shared, and that creates an environment where, people don't come forward.
Absolutely. How do you want to see the partner organizations being empowered to serve victims' rights that are being violated, and to really help people continue to come forward?
I think a part of that is to ensure that they have a seat at the table, and that gets back to some of the conversation we were just having. It is quite clear, and attorneys and advocates who represent victims are often told victims don't have standing. You're not a party. You have no standing. In other words, you have no place here. And so to change that framework again, wherein absolutely advocates, absolutely their attorneys, absolutely their agencies have a right to be in the conversation, I think is an important part of that framework shift that we're trying to do in terms of thinking about victims' rights in a more meaningful way. So yes, if you make space at the table, and make sure that there is space. And,
oh yes,
yes,
I couldn't agree more.
And by changing I feel that's where the center's role is really important in terms of empowering the agencies and again, the people with the boots on the ground who are trying to do this work and raising awareness of these issues, raising awareness of their challenges. We've been doing some work with Disability Rights Vermont and just trying to elevate the conversation to a statewide level and get the attention of stakeholders that these are issues that are very real and they're having just unbelievably uh, negative, painful impacts on victims and on the people that are trying to do the work. It's contributes to significant burnout when you're trying to do everything that you can and you're constantly being told, no. So I
Right.
think to empower them, it's about, again, the center, shining a spotlight on these issues and elevating the conversation, shining awareness on it, and making sure that we start to shift the framework around victims' rights and making them become something that's meaningful.
Absolutely. I mean, I love when you said seat at the table. Like, that's something I say every single training I
Mm-hmm.
do. And I just think like there's such a tremendous difference when you don't just feel like a victim. When you're put at the table, you actually start to feel like a human again. It changes everything. It changes how you walk through that process. It
Mm-hmm.
changes the healing process. And so I really love that you said that, and just want to keep empowering all of our organizations to do that. It is incredible. So what work do you envision doing at the CCVS to ensure that those who serve victims are working collaboratively and proactively, and we are not stuck in our own silos to, keep that multidisciplinary teams going and not be so one lane focused?
Mm-hmm. Well, and wow, did COVID really like dig us into those silos so deeply? I think that just by nature of the work, we do tend to become so reactive because there's really not often time or the luxury of being able to think outside of, oh my gosh, I have to respond to this incident right now. So what we had thought about, and we were in conversation with some legislators, was to try and create a victim advisory council that the center would convene, but would be comprised of victims, survivors, and also providers who do the work and do have these current, sort of siloed approaches just by virtue of necessity. So thinking about parallel justice representatives, thinking about Department of Corrections victims advocates, thinking about, the state's attorney's advocates, the network, child advocates, just bringing together our sub-grantees in a regular way. So we have those connections. It's just about being more deliberate and intentional about having ongoing conversations, at least on a quarterly basis, to talk about trends and challenges and see if there's, because the power of those voices speaking all together would be tremendous in terms of being able to move initiatives forward. So we're hoping that that will get taken up and passed. But even if it doesn't, that's my vision. It's been my vision since I took this job, and it would, I've shared this with our partners. So we would intend to move forward with it anyway. Realistically, given that I just started and given that I'm thrown into this session with a lot of challenges, it wouldn't start till the summer. But that's one of our plans. Is just to make sure that we're setting aside time to have those proactive conversations. And we're planning actually an advocate summit for the fall, wherein we're going to start to just pull people together after all of this COVID stuff, and maybe we'll even be in person to some extent because we can be outside and start to pull together advocates and then create opportunities for breakouts that would be either specific issue focused or regionally or just those kinds of pieces. So we're starting to think about that as well.
That's amazing. And I really love the council that you're thinking about, because it's once again putting everyone at the table together.
Yeah.
And I think when everyone's at the table with that focus on the victim, we start to be able to collaborate and really
Mm-hmm.
understand that it has to be, we have to intersect, we have to be working together. And
Mm-hmm.
very excited to hear about this possible advocacy conference or training as well. I think that would be great. Because we all miss being together. Like, that's just been part
Sure.
of it, is that, can you share with our listeners how COVID has impacted victims of crime and prohibited victim services and first responders from serving victims? Just kind of, we've all been in it for so long, but kind of speak to that a little bit.
Sure, and it's been so layered. First, just it won't be a surprise, I don't think, to any of your listeners or to you that COVID and the impacts of COVID have created this. It basically has exacerbated every stressor for the commission of crime and the commission of harm that can be imagined. COVID has, by increasing isolation, there was that whole phrase, what is it, stay at home, safe at home. But for many individuals, that's not the case. In fact, staying at home creates additional danger. And the isolation, the lack of access to supports, children not being around mandated reporters, other victims not able to access, pro supports that could be helpful to them. So you have, the isolation, the stress on individuals and what that looks like. I've increased, drug use and substance use, anxiety, loss of employment. So it's kind of this awful soup of just not very good things. And we also saw a dramatic increase in online sexual exploitation of children during that period. So that's another piece. And the nature of the crimes that we've seen that have been coming forward, both the needs are so much more complex for victims and survivors that are dealing with additional stress, anxiety, mental health issues, and also the complexity, the nature of the violence is much more severe than what we've seen. So it's that the complexity of the needs and the level of the violence and the impact of that is much more significant. And our providers have just been asked to do more with less, and have been trying to think outside the box in terms of how you meet victims and survivors, how you support them. Social workers that need to go out to homes were not able to do that. Advocates who needed to go to the hospital if there was a SANE exam being conducted, that was an additional layer of problem. Interviewers who needed to meet with children when there was an allegation of abuse. Again, how do you do that during COVID? So I can't express my admiration for the providers enough that really had to figure out, how do we do this during this unprecedented time? And it got done, but it was really stressful, and it's happening, but it's not ideal, and they are really struggling. And I do also want to add the impact of COVID on the courts. We're all familiar with the backup and how that's been dealt with in terms of the impact on victims has not been supportive either. In Franklin County, the judge decided to deal with the backlog by dismissing 400 cases outright. And
that's horrible.
And many of them were violations of abuse prevention orders. So they were it wasn't that they were victimless cases. It was just that the backlog needed to be reduced. And something similar happened in St. Johnsbury as well, where there were 35 or 40 cases that were dismissed outright. And there's been a lot of focus, I think, on defendants waiting for their trial and their right to speedy trial. But I think just as equally, the focus needs to be on the notion of justice delayed is justice denied, which is very real for victims of crime, because either the cases are being dismissed, they're also waiting for justice. And also NPR did a great story on this, talking about the fact that, witnesses' memories fade. Often the delay in bringing a case forward benefits the defendant, because witnesses move, memories fade. And so again, that justice becomes just that much more elusive in these cases. So COVID is, I can't overstate enough the horrible and significant impact that COVID has had on victims in so many different ways.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember 2 years ago having Karen Tronsgaard-Scott on from the Vermont Network right as COVID was starting to look at how the state was going to respond to victims of crime through this. And I mean, everyone has done a tremendous job, first responders, of doing the best they can, but it has just been such a hurdle, and just so many people unable to access services. It's been a really just terrifying and sad situation to watch. So I commend everywhere here in Vermont that has done the best they could to serve populations.
And so many of them, Anna, that I speak with are just so burnt out. They just don't have the wherewithal to. It's the impact on them again is just really significant. And I wonder if we'll be able to get them back to a place where they're feeling supportive and supported and energized to be able to do what already is really challenging work.
Absolutely. Just that, like, how do you keep going? And,
Mhm.
with a world that's so challenging already, and be able to care for yourself and feel that energy and just, yeah, I mean, I think all of us, we go to bed at night and we think about all these people who are out there who need assistance, and it breaks your heart. So thank you to all the advocates and first responders and everyone else
Yes,
that
thank
has
you.
done this through this time. So as we wind down today, Jennifer, what do you envision the future of the CCVS and the state of Vermont to look like as we serve victims of crime?
Well, I guess my pipe dream would be that we would have a state where funding for victim services would be stable and robust and predictable. So my vision has to include that as the as something that will take place, and we are working on that hard this session. But I think my vision would be that we would have um, some sort of enforced victims' rights on the books that would have some sort of teeth in them. I'm not expecting the whole panoply of rights to have that enforceability, but some of the basic rights. If you are a family member and there's it's a homicide case, the case should not move forward with it when you haven't been notified, but that happens. That's a that those are kind of basic pieces that I feel like if we can't all rally around that, then we're in a really bad place. So some basic enforceability of rights. Also expand our ability to support victims outside of the criminal justice system. We do a great job in Vermont when we're well resourced in terms of supporting victims through the criminal justice system when there's been a police report. I couldn't be prouder of this state, but I think we need to look more and more about how we can provide robust support outside of the criminal justice system. So I'd like to be a part of that. And that would also include developing or having systems available that where victims have more options in terms of just, seeking justice for themselves, and options that reflect what they feel justice would look like in their case. So I envision absolutely we have to keep our core in place that we really do an amazing job with, but it's meeting the needs outside of that realm as well, I think is where I'd like to see our focus, be equal.
Amazing. I love that. And I really think that with your leadership, the state is in really good hands. And I do want to say, I really like that you brought up, like, how to serve victims that aren't in the criminal justice system is so important, because not every victim is
Mhm.
going to go through that process, but still needs support and services. So I think that's really
Very few
important.
do in terms of the interpersonal cases.
Yeah,
We know that.
absolutely. So just thank you so much for being here today and for your leadership
Thank you.
with the CCVS. For our listeners, if you'd like to learn more, you can go to ccvs.vermont.gov. And I always like to close with a positive message that you want to leave with the listeners. Is there one parting thought that you have that you'd like to leave?
Well, I guess the word I was thinking of was possibility, is that there's always possibilities that no matter the situation, no matter, the day, as long as we are alive, as long as we breathe, that there are possibilities for in every opportunity, there are possibilities for change. There is a way. So I think about when I feel down in this work, I think about there's always a possibility.
I love that. And that's so important to remember right now, is there's a possibility for change and for a new day, and that we can keep going no matter how hard it gets. So that does it for us this week, my friends. Thank you so much, Jennifer Poehlmann, Executive
Thank you.
Director for Center for Crime Victim Services, for being here. If you have any questions about the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me, Anna@standupresources.com. I'm your host, Anna Nassett, and I look forward to sharing more with you every other week here on The MEND. Be well, be strong, and goodbye.